This is topic 8.7 and 8.8, persistent organic pollutants and bioaccumulation and biomagnification. At the top here you have our learning targets or learning objectives. Follow along with your study guide for these things. A little academic vocabulary to begin with. The word persistence means that it lasts a long time. So if something is persistent, it means it lasts a long time. The word persistence refers to the length of time. And so we use it in this term. They're called persistent organic pollutants because they do not easily break down in the environment. They are synthetic, which is man-made, carbon-based molecules like DDT and PCBs. They can be toxic to organisms because they're soluble in fat. Soluble means they dissolve in fat, which allows them to accumulate in organisms' fatty tissues, including ours. Just a little tidbit, some things that accumulate in fatty tissues is THC from marijuana, which is why you can test positive for a drug test for marijuana 30 days after you smoke pot or eat pot, marijuana, because it is fat soluble. It's stored in the fat tissues. Just a little side note. Okay. Another thing is that they travel over long distances through wind and water currents before being redeposited. So you can see that they come from industry. Firefighting, what does that mean? Well, the chemicals in these fire extinguishers and also fire-resistant materials. So fireproofing materials is persistent organic pollutants. And so they get into our food, they get into our consumer goods, and that's not good. So concentrations of chemicals experienced by organisms depends on how you get it, the route of exposure, and the solubility, how it dissolves in a liquid. Now you don't have to know those two things, but that's a little background to help you understand and get the full context of these topics. All right, so here's our definition of biomagnification. It's the increase of chemical concentration in animal tissue as the chemical moves up the food chain. Your top predators will have higher quantities of chemicals in their tissues due to having consumed higher volumes of nutrients. So if this is our pollutant, it looks like oil, but it could be DDT, it could be PCB, it could be flame retardants, which are PCBs, PBDEs. Anyway, in the smaller mayflies, they're not going to be that toxic and they're not going to really harm the mayflies, but they start to build up in the fatty tissues of the bluegill, which is eaten by the bass, which builds up over time more, and then the humans eat the bass. Actually, I don't know if humans eat bass, maybe sea bass. Bass is usually more a sporting fish. That's a side note. And besides, I'm not a fisher person, so I don't really know anyway. Maybe you know more than me. So by the time it gets to humans or other top predatory animals, you have higher numbers of toxins. This is one of the reasons why rat poison is especially bad. Where I live, it kills coyotes and mountain lions because people kill rats in their property, in their yards with rat poison. The rats go off and die. And then the scavengers eat it, like raccoons, coyotes, and then the mountain lions will eat those animals, and it builds up. So a little bit of rat poison in a rat can build up in the tissues of things like mountain lions and kill them over time. All right, so let's learn about DDT. It used to be an insecticide widely used to kill mosquitoes. It doesn't actually directly hurt people or the environment, so they thought it was fine. So you can see that's an old advertisement for DDT. My mom said that growing up in the 40s and the 50s on a farm in Colorado, that her mom just had a box. It was DDT powder, and she would sprinkle it around the baseboards of the house to kill ants and other bugs. So it was common. The problem with DDT is that it's not water soluble, so it binds to algae and enters the food chain. And then what happens is that it builds up through bioaccumulation and biomagnification to your top predatory birds like bald eagles. And it interferes with the ability to make calcium for eggs, so large birds would squash the eggs before they could hatch. It's currently banned in the US because of this, but still used globally, especially where you have malaria. It's really good at killing malaria. And millions of people still die of malaria in places like Africa in the world today. Okay, some other information about DDT. What does it break down into? DDE. Where do they concentrate on the planet? They actually, for some, well, we know the reason. All you have to know is that because of wind and water currents, it ends up in the Arctic, which is the North Pole. This process is called global distillation. When was DDT banned in the US? And why would we still find DDT in our fruits and vegetables in the grocery store? 1972, it can still be found on food when growers illegally use it, mainly in other countries that food is imported to in the US. This is not allowed, but it's still done. We only have the budget to, Congress only gives a certain amount of money to the USDA to inspect food. And it's only about, they only have the manpower and the budget to inspect 1% of the food that comes in and is sold at the grocery store. This time of year in the winter, I was just eating grapes that come from Peru. And a lot of our fruits that it's too cold to grow here are grown in South America, because remember they have opposite seasons and they're shipped here. Or they're grown closer to the equator in southern Mexico. And sometimes those growers use illegal pesticides, even though they're not allowed to for food that comes to the US. One other thing to know is that, let's talk about marijuana again, is that a lot of marijuana, they have found massive amounts of pesticides on them and other chemicals, including DDT. And even an article just came out where they tested a private, I think it was a newspaper, tested all of these marijuana that came from legal pot shops in Los Angeles and other parts of California. And they found that they're fully contaminated. Almost every bit of marijuana is massive amounts of marijuana in it. That also then goes into vape cartridges. And so people don't know it, but they're smoking or vaping or eating massive amounts of DDT and other bad pesticides. So even the shops that say they've got independently certified, apparently it's kind of a big fraud thing. You can Google it if you want or are more interested in that. So just be cautious if that is something. Remember, it's not legal for students to do below a certain age. So as you get older, make sure you're cautious about those things. Okay, next. Chemicals that can accumulate in an individual's body can affect organisms in food chains. So bioaccumulation is the selective absorption and concentration of a chemical within an organism over time. Basically, it says it accumulates in the fat tissues. And then it gets higher and higher on the food chain. So accumulation is the storage in the fat tissues. Biomagnification is getting higher and higher as you go up the food chain. Okay, the liver and kidneys rid and eliminate the body of toxins. Why then do some toxins accumulate? Again, stored in fat cells, which take longer to break down. What top predatory fish are impacted by mercury? How does it get into the ocean? Okay, and how is human health impacted? Here we go. You got to know this. Tuna, swordfish, and sharks are the top predatory fish by mercury. Here's what happened. You have to know this sequence. Coal is burned. Rain brings it to land, which washes it into the river, which flows to the ocean. It's absorbed by plankton and works its way up the food chain through biomagnification and bioaccumulation. Health problems of mercury, neurological problems, and the lowering of IQ. Pregnant women and children should limit the consumption of these fish. And if you're interested in what levels is healthy to eat of certain types of fish, so how much sushi can you eat, how much tuna sandwiches can you eat, you can just Google tuna calculator and it will tell you by your age, sex, and if you're pregnant or not, how much is safe. All right, that's it for these topics.